Welcome to the Secrets of the Bible channel. Terah is a central figure in this narrative, emerging from sacred scriptures as a fundamental link in the genealogy leading us to Abraham, the patriarch of many nations. His initial mention occurs in the book of Genesis, precisely in chapters 11, verses 24 to 32, introducing him not only as the progenitor of Abraham, but also of Nahor and Haran, and indirectly of Sarai, later known as Sarah. This genealogical connection is not merely informative, but a prelude to the unfolding of a larger narrative, centered on the formation of the people of Israel and the Messianic promise. The mention of Terah invites us to delve into the journey of faith in the transition from idolater to monotheist, reflecting the spiritual movement that Abraham would complete in the biblical narrative. Although concise about Terah, it sparks curiosity about his life, his role as a father, and his journey, laying the groundwork for the monumental story of faith that would follow with his son Abraham. Imagine a man like many others living his life in the Ur of the Chaldeans, a rich place, bustling with life, and full of gods for every taste and desire. But then something extraordinary begins to unfold. We don't know much about the exact moment, about the click that must have happened in Terah's heart, but we know that something moved him to make a choice that would change not only his life, but the course of history. Terah, with his family, decides to leave Ur. Have you ever stopped to think about the magnitude of this decision? To leave behind the security, the familiarity, and the gods he knew, to venture into the unknown. Terah's journey was not a smooth ride. Imagine packing up your entire life, your family, and your belongings and embarking on a journey without GPS, without Google Maps, without knowing exactly where you're going or what you will find along the way. And so, Terah's journey finds a pause in Haran. Why did he stop there? What made him settle in that city? The Bible does not give us specific details, but we can imagine that, like many of us, Terah may have found comfort in the familiarity of Haran, a place that perhaps offered him a glimpse of Ur, but without being Ur. Maybe he thought about building a new life there. Maybe it was a pause to reflect on the next steps. What we know is that Haran became an important chapter in Terah's story, a place of transition between the past and the promised future. At this point in history, Terah may not have known, but his journey, his decision to leave Ur, to stop in Haran, was preparing the stage for something bigger than himself. It was indeed paving the way for his son Abraham to continue this journey of faith. Terah teaches us that even without seeing the complete picture, our actions can be seeds for the fulfillment of divine promises. The lineage of Terah, which goes back to Noah's son Shem, presents us with a spiritual and historical continuity that transcends generations. As we unfold the tapestry of biblical genealogy, we encounter characters like Serug and Nahor, Terah's grandfather and father respectively. This transmission chain not only provides us with a historical context, but also makes us ponder the gaps and silences in the narrative. In this walk through history, each name in the genealogy, from Shem to Terah, tells us a story of faith, of choices, and sometimes of silences that speak louder than words. Let's imagine the lives of these people, living in times so different from ours, yet connected by a divine purpose that unfolds over the centuries. Serug and Nahor, for example, are not just names on a list, they are links in a chain that connects the past to the future. Real people who lived, dreamed, and made decisions that would affect not only their lives, but future generations. These figures, though distant, remind us that every step we take and every decision we make has the potential to echo through time. They teach us about the responsibility we carry, not only with our own lives, but as part of a historical and spiritual continuity. Imagine Serug looking at his son Nahor, and Nahor at Terah, without knowing that they were, each in their way, contributing to a much larger story than themselves. A story that would culminate in the figure of Abraham, the father of nations. Now, think for a moment about the gaps and silences in the narrative. How many stories were not told? How many acts of faith and courage remain backstage, unrecorded in the pages of the Bible, but equally important in God's plan? These gaps in the biblical narrative invite us to recognize the presence and action of God even in the unsaid. In the space between words, in the silences charged with meaning, it is an invitation to value each person and story as an essential part of this great fabric of faith. The text, by mentioning the longevity of these ancestors and their descendants, invites us to contemplate the depth of time and the fragility of memory. It is intriguing to consider that if we were to take Terah's genealogy as exhaustive and chronological, Shem would be alive during Abraham's lifetime, a fact that challenges our understanding of biblical time. This genealogical element, although representative, highlights the key figures in Terah's lineage, emphasizing their importance, not by the completeness of the story, but by the essential role they play in preparing the groundwork for Abraham's journey of faith. In its majestic narrative, the Bible dedicates only brief words to Terah's life, leaving much to the imagination and interpretation of scholars and believers. This silence about specific details of his life does not diminish his importance in the grand biblical tapestry. On the contrary, it incites a particular fascination, inviting us to fill in the gaps about his historical and spiritual context. The scant biographical information we have about Terah, situated in the lineages of Shem and Abraham, serves as a beacon illuminating the path of the divine promise that would flow through his descendants. This narrative element reminds us that often in the history of faith, the less spoken of characters may have played fundamental roles in God's plans, preparing the ground for the events that would follow. The complexity of Terah's genealogy, which extends to Noah, presents us with a historical and theological puzzle. The ages and lineages meticulously recorded are not mere curiosities. They reflect a reality where time and faith intertwine in ways that transcend our linear understanding. As we consider the possible gaps in the genealogy, we are led to a deeper reflection on the significance of representation in the scriptures. This genealogical approach, which highlights individuals not by the top quality of their lineage, but by their life's spiritual and historical impact, teaches us about the importance of every soul in fulfilling divine purposes. Terah's life, though brief in the scriptures, resonates through the generations, echoing the promise of a nation and a faith that would extend far beyond him. The sacred text remains silent about Terah's wife and the mother of his children, an omission that reflects the narrative practices of the time, where the main focus was on paternal lineages. However, this gap opens up a space for reflection on the role of women in biblical history, often unrecorded, but undeniably fundamental. The mystery surrounding Terah's wife invites us to consider the strength and faith of these anonymous matriarchs, whose lives and legacies, though unnamed, are essential in the weaving of Abrahamic faith. This silence about Terah's family matriarch serves as a subtle reminder that the history of faith is composed of both the echoes of recorded voices and the whispers of those left unmentioned. Turning our gaze to the role of women in the biblical narrative, especially in the context of Terah's family, invites us to see beyond what is written. Although the Bible does not mention the name of Terah's wife or detail her life, we can imagine the strength and determination she possessed. Living in a time and culture where the female role was predominantly behind the scenes, this woman, the matriarch of Terah's family, played a fundamental role not only in raising her children, but also in perpetuating the faith that would be the foundation for future generations. These women, whose stories were not detailed in the sacred scriptures, represent many others throughout history who, unrecognized, shaped the future with their faith, wisdom, and love. When we think about Terah's journey from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran, it is impossible not to consider the courage and strength of this woman, accompanying her husband and family on this uncertain journey. She was a pillar of support and faith, even when the path ahead was unknown. Her life, though not detailed in the Bible, echoes the importance of every contribution, visible or not, to God's grand plan. This reflection on Terah's wife allows us to better understand the complexity and beauty of biblical history. Recognizing the contribution of women, often anonymous, is to recognize that we all have a role to play in God's plan. The revelation that Sarai, later Sarah, was Abraham's half-sister on their father's side introduces a complex dimension to Terah's narrative. This detail not only sheds light on Terah's family structure, but also on the marital practices of the time, which differed substantially from the ethical standards later established by Mosaic law. Marriage between half-siblings within this cultural context was not uncommon or considered inappropriate, reflecting a period before the codification of laws that would later regulate such relationships. Terah's journey from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran is laden with theological significance and symbolism. Ur, known for its advanced civilization and idolatrous practices, represents not only a physical location but a spiritual state, from which Terah and his family were called to depart. This migration, though unfinished by Terah, who settled in Haran, foreshadows the journey of faith that Abraham would complete, leaving Haran under divine direction. Terah's stopover in Haran, then, is not just a footnote in biblical history, but a pivotal moment, a threshold between the idolatrous past and the promised monotheistic future to Abraham and his descendants. Terah's idolatrous practice, as mentioned in the book of Joshua, provides a crucial backdrop for understanding the radicality of Abraham's call. This detail not only situates Terah's family within the broad panorama of the religiosity of the time, but also highlights the act of divine grace in calling Abraham from a pagan environment to be the founder of a monotheistic faith. Terah's transition from an idolater to possibly a follower of the one true God reflects a recurring theme in the scriptures: redemption and transformation. Therefore, Abraham's faith can be seen as emerging not despite, but through the idolatrous context of his family, a demonstration of the divine power to make all things new. The mention of Terah in the New Testament, albeit brief, serves as a bridge between the Old and New Covenants, connecting the genealogy of Jesus Christ to the patriarch Abraham and by extension to Terah. This genealogical thread is not merely a list of names, but a testimony to God's continuous faithfulness through the generations. The inclusion of Terah in the New Testament scriptures reaffirms his place in the history of salvation, not just as a mere prelude to Abraham, but as an integral part of a divine narrative culminating in the incarnation, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. This genealogical link illustrates how each generation, no matter how distant or seemingly insignificant, contributes to the unfolding of God's purpose in history. In this context of transformation and faith, Terah's story leads us to a broader and deeper understanding of transformative power. Imagine, amidst a culture deeply rooted in the worship of various gods, the Lord chooses Abraham, the son of a man known for his idolatrous practices. This act not only highlights God's sovereignty in choosing whom he desires, but also shows us that no one is outside the reach of his transforming grace. Reflecting on Terah's transition, we can glimpse the divine act paving the way for significant changes in human history. God did not choose Abraham by chance. He saw in Abraham the willingness to listen, believe, and obey, even when everything around him pointed in the opposite direction. Abraham's journey of faith, initiated under the shadow of his father's idolatry, becomes a powerful testimony to God's call that transcends human circumstances, pointing to a much greater promise and a Redeemer's future. Terah's connection to the messianic lineage mentioned in the New Testament further reinforces the idea that no detail of human history is small or insignificant in God's eyes. Every person, every action, from Terah to the birth of Christ, is part of a meticulously orchestrated plan for the redemption of the world. Therefore, Terah's mention is not just a genealogical record, it is an affirmation of God's faithfulness, that, through the generations, prepares the way for the salvation of all humanity. This connection between Terah and the coming of Christ teaches us about the divine purpose unfolding through the ages, uniting generations through faith. It shows us that everyone's story, no matter how simple or complex, has a place in the grand tapestry of divine salvation, and reminds us that regardless of the past, God is capable of transforming stories and hearts, leading us to a future where his sovereign will manifest in love and grace. Terah's journey from Ur of the Chaldeans to Haran and the subsequent calling of Abraham to leave Haran represent critical moments of faith and obedience in the Bible. While Terah initiated the journey, it was Abraham who, by faith, responded to God's divine call to go to a land that God would show him. This sequence of events highlights a profound truth about walking with God. Faith requires action and divine guidance, even when the final destination is unknown. Terah's story, therefore, serves as a prelude to Abraham's exemplary faith, underscoring the importance of responding to God's call and the need to trust in his leadership. Terah's stay in Haran until the end of his days is narrated with a touch of melancholy in the scriptures, suggesting an unfinished journey. Terah's death in Haran before reaching Canaan can be seen as a metaphor for the human condition. We are all on a journey of faith, but not all of us reach the fullness of the promise in our earthly lives. Through Terah, we are reminded that although we may not see the complete fulfillment of God's promises in our lives, every step we take in obedience prepares the way for future generations. Terah's idolatrous worship, as recorded in the book of Joshua, highlights a striking contrast between his son Abraham's faith and the predominant religious practices of his time. This contrast not only illuminates God's divine decision to call Abraham, but also emphasizes the revolutionary nature of the Abrahamic faith. By choosing Abraham, God not only initiates a new lineage of faith, but also establishes a new paradigm of relationship with the divine, based not on idols made by human hands, but on the worship of the one invisible God. Terah's inclusion in Stephen's preaching as recorded in Acts serves to reaffirm the continuity of the history of salvation from Terah to Christ. By mentioning Terah, Stephen not only traces Abraham's lineage but also highlights God's movement through history, calling people from pagan contexts to be part of his redeemed family. This continuity reinforces the message that the history of salvation is inclusive, encompassing people of all generations and cultures invited to be part of God's people. The faith and obedience of Abraham, though the main focus of the biblical narratives that follow, did not emerge in a vacuum. They are largely a response to the legacy of his father Terah. Even with his flaws and adherence to idolatrous practices, Terah began the journey that would bring his family closer to the promised land. This perspective reminds us that faith is often a legacy passed from generation to generation, shaped by both the failures and virtues of those who came before us. Terah's legacy, though marked by idolatry and an unfinished journey, is crucial for understanding the history of redemption. His life serves as a reminder that God is capable of transforming incomplete stories into testimonies of his grace. God's divine choice of Abraham, a descendant of Terah, illustrates the redeeming power of God capable of renewing lineages and destinies, guiding them toward a promised future and a new relationship with the divine. Terah's story, though briefly outlined in the scriptures, is a poignant reminder of God's sovereignty and his ability to use all people and circumstances for his eternal purposes. Terah's migration from Ur to Haran, though not completed with the original intention of reaching Canaan, was an instrumental step in preparing the way for Abraham's call. This aspect of the narrative underscores a vital principle in the divine economy. Even the deviations and stops along the journey of faith can be used by God to facilitate his greater plans. Therefore, Terah's life is not just a footnote in the history of redemption, but an integral piece in the mosaic of biblical faith, demonstrating how God works through generations to fulfill his promises. The existence of gaps in Terah's genealogy and history serves as an invitation to reflect on the many untold stories and unregistered names in the scriptures, each possessing its role in God's grand plan. This awareness helps us appreciate the magnitude and depth of the history of salvation, which is composed of both great acts of faith and silent steps of everyday obedience. Thus, Terah's family dynamics, especially the complexity of his relationships with his children and the marital situation of Abraham and Sarah, highlight the intricate nature of human relationships and the role they play in divine history. Through this prism, we are reminded that God often operates within family structures, using them as vehicles for his grace and purposes. Terah's family, with all its peculiarities, becomes a mirror of the complexities and graces found in families of all eras, emphasizing God's ability to transform imperfect human realities into testimonies of his faithfulness. Terah's unfinished journey to Canaan, interrupted by his death in Haran, underscores the progressive nature of faith. This narrative teaches us that the journey of faith is often a transgenerational project, where the baton is passed from one generation to the next, each building upon the foundation laid by the previous one. In this sense, Terah's story is a precursor to humanity's broader journey of faith toward the fullness of revelation and redemption in Christ. The idolatrous context from which Terah and his family came serves as a backdrop to Abraham's radical call to serve the one true God. This shift of faith from a polytheistic culture to a monotheistic relationship with God highlights the theme of redemption and renewal that permeates the biblical narrative. As we consider Terah's life within this larger context, we are inspired to reflect on our journey of faith, recognizing how God calls us in various forms, from our modern to a deeper and more meaningful relationship with him. In this journey of faith that Terah initiated, we see the complexity of family life intertwining with divine purpose in surprising ways. Terah's relationship with his children and the decision to leave Ur, the city of the Chaldeans, for a promised land he would not see. All this shows us how faith in God can lead us to make decisions that reverberate far beyond our own lives. When Terah departed for Canaan, He not only left behind a city, but also laid the groundwork for the foundation of Ur. Terah's passing was not the end, but a crucial link in the chain of events that would lead to God's covenant with Abraham. This transition from a known home to the unknown, from established religious practice to an emerging faith in one God, echoes the transitions each of us faces in our journey of faith. The story of Terah's family, with its nuances and twists, reflects the very nature of human existence. We are all part of a larger narrative. Each of our choices influences not only our own lives, but also the lives of those around us and even future generations. Like Terah's family, every family carries its own stories of faith, doubt, choices, and redemption. Terah's transition from an idolatrous context to indirectly becoming the forerunner of one of humanity's greatest stories of faith reminds us that transformation is always possible. God calls each of us. No matter where we come from or what we have done, just as Abraham was called from a land of idols to become the father of many nations, we are all called from our own places of comfort, familiarity, and sometimes complacency to a deeper and more significant relationship with God. We have reached the end of our video, and I hope you like it. If you're looking for inspiration, knowledge, and spiritual connection, don't let this opportunity pass you by. Subscribe to our channel now, leave your like and comment to strengthen our community. And if you want to help us continue sharing religious stories that touch hearts, become a channel member. Together we can make a difference and strengthen our spiritual journey. We're counting on you. We've left the link in the description of this video so you can become a member today. Amen. Continue watching videos about the history of the Bible. I will leave 2 recommendations here on the screen. God bless you. We will get to the next video.